Don't worry, be happy. La 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 la. Please, please, please. Yes, please. Yes, please. Peace to the bear.
Hey, yo, what's up, guys? Today we have a special guest for an emergency sort of episode because of current events. Mateus from Kritikpunkt.
Hello.
Can you explain what that magazine name means in English?
Yes, Kritikpunkt means point of criticism.
Yeah, and then of course our co-host Henry. Henry, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Henry, and
Um,
I'm just letting us.
yeah, and we have all been shocked by the events of January 3rd, where Maduro was literally kidnapped by the United States in the middle of the night. 80 people were killed, and now the world is just in shock and awe as to where the United States moves next. And while a lot of people certainly have been falling for the propaganda, right? It sounds a lot like Iraq 2.0 in a lot of ways, and the propaganda is so sloppy, right? In so many ways. I mean, a lot of it rings to me like they're doing the homework the night before and they just turned it in last minute, right? Like fentanyl was labeled WMDs. They connected it to narco terrorism, so they connected like Hamas, Hezbollah, and drugs. And now they have Maduro in New York, and they're charging him with drug trafficking, weapons within American courts. They have essentially ripped up the post World War II order in this single act, and now nations are just scrambling to figure out where we go from here. But the reason I brought on Mateus was because we need to know how we got into this situation, and you co-wrote an excellent article on the history of Venezuela.
Yes, sure, definitely. Before we do that, I would just really quick want to get into the drug trafficking thing because I know that's very current, but I think it's ridiculous enough that I'd want to start with the drug trafficking, the allegations, and then let's go to the history. Okay?
Mhm.
Okay. So Venezuela is irrelevant in drug trafficking, right? This isn't even like a Iran thing where that I guess they're working on nuclear weapons or whatever. No, it's irrelevant, right? Only 5% of Colombian drugs, which is where the U.S. cocaine comes from, passes through Venezuela. In 2018, I have written here 210 tons of cocaine passed through Venezuela, whereas 2,370 tons passed through Colombia and 1,400 tons through Guatemala, where the US has military bases. So the argument is absolutely irrelevant. I just wanted to start off by saying this because I had someone in the Kritikpunkt DMs earlier who called themselves a communist, and they said, well, and they made a kind of, in my opinion, a ridiculous comparison. They said, well, we are German. They said, well, if Poland was producing so many drugs and sending them over to Germany, wouldn't you want to bomb Poland? I was like, I don't know. Maybe we did that before.
May I,
No, not again. Yeah.
may I just interject with a point of irony? So
Mhm.
sorry, but if you haven't heard, there's a great book called The Fort Bragg Cartel, which really underscores one of the most absurd things about that drug narrative, which is that the sections of the U.S. military that were responsible for kidnapping Maduro and carrying all of this out were uh, were in part responsible for the opioid epidemic in the United States because they trafficked so many drugs illegally from Afghanistan because these people were in a position to do so because they were interdicting the opium trade in Afghanistan. So, uh, you know, just to point out that not only is the U.S. complicit in this, the specific forces that were used in the kidnapping of Maduro are deeply involved in the drug trade and killing Americans, no less. So I think that's really the height of irony and shows how twisted around people are from Western propaganda, American propaganda.
Even then, America has backed drug dictators all throughout Latin America's history, and Trump literally released the former president of Honduras, pardoned him, who was serving time for drugs, right? Like smuggling drugs. So within the same month that he pardoned the former president of Honduras that smuggled drugs, he's arresting Maduro. And so really right now, the only people who are supporting this, the only thing they really have to say is Maduro's a brutal dictator and he kills people. And sure, I'm not denying that Maduro is brutal, and that there's many issues with the Bolivarian government. But the idea that America and Chevron and ExxonMobil have the best interests of the Venezuelan proletariat, or they're going to install a democracy or some bullshit like that, is completely absurd. Is completely absurd. Or that you can install in democracy through bombs. Like this is, again, it's exactly like Saddam Hussein. Like, yeah, I'm not saying Saddam Hussein was a good guy. All he did was gas Kurds and go into like irrelevant wars that he really
He was
do.
a lion. He was a lion.
Yeah, a lion, yeah, and then he got his ass beat by Iran. I'm gonna get a lot of pissed off Iraq.
Well, and also like I'm Hussein was infinitely worse than Maduro. Like,
Yeah,
Yes, definitely.
not
and then still, like, what did we replace it with? Iraq. The government we replaced with Iraq has not built a single public school since we installed in the new government, right? Like we've replaced it with complete shit. Um,
really Iran that was the biggest winner from the whole invasion and everything.
Well, I guess two things here. First of all, I think this is like an American thing because I haven't heard this from any European communists, at least, or not in the same way that people have commented and written us over the last couple of days since we kind of republished the Venezuela article, which is people saying you shouldn't criticize Maduro, or at least you shouldn't criticize the Bolivarian project right now because they're being attacked by U.S. imperialism. I don't understand that argument. Why? I mean, aren't people? I mean, people are able to hold two different pieces of information, right, and form a concrete opinion from them.
And I think there's a big distinction to make between pointing out the failures insofar as they're insufficient to developing socialism and insufficient to resisting American imperialism. Like we can look at Chavez, and Chavez was relatively quite successful economically compared to Maduro. When people blame the economic situation since Maduro has taken over on Western imperialism, that's only part of the picture. And Chavez had all of that too. And I think it's one thing to say these are failings because they are not effective in this struggle, as opposed to, well, we should hold both things, be this kind of liberal, have this liberal view that, well, both are bad, or that's nuanced.
Definitely. Right. It's always anti-imperialism, obviously, right? And then the second thing is, I don't, even if, let's say, even if the American occupation government of Iraq built 1 billion schools and was lovely and perfect, it was still imperialism, right? I don't think like you can even saying that, like I hear this argument over the last couple of days. I hear it a lot. Like, where has U.S. imperialist invasion ever given the people of that country anything better after? Yes, true, never, right? But even if, right, imperialism is not to be accounted for in morals, good or bad. It's a system that functions beside of the intentions of the actor, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I also searched it up. Iraq only started building schools in 2021 after they got a Chinese loan. So there you go. But it's also the dependency, right? Having dependency on America and being a friend of America is so fucking dangerous, as the European states are finding out currently.
Yes.
You do not want to be dependent on America as your main ally. And also, it's such a weird trolley problem that liberals are giving us right now, right? 80 people were killed in order to kidnap Maduro. And so what is your exact line in terms of improving lives versus citizens bombed? And uh, right now the media is a blast with so-called Venezuelans celebrating. And of course, the Bolivarian government has itself made many enemies that do legitimately hate the government, but it also has a very strong support base, such as peasant militias, and anytime the opposition tries to overthrow the government, there's always pro-government protesters that always overpower them. Um, but the thing is, even if they are celebrating, objectively, what America is trying to do is imperialism. Objectively, what America, yes, is trying to do is exploit its resources. Objectively, what America is looking for is to create a cheap source of commodities, right? So oil, a cheap source of laborers, right? That $1 trillion investment, it's not only going to be put into oil, it's also going to be put into a area of the world that has less negotiating power, whose labor power is less pricey, so they can exploit Venezuelan workers in sweatshop factories and cheap labor. And then also to create a lot of stateless Venezuelans that come to America as undocumented migrants. And then again, you get cheap labor because they're not allowed to be citizens. This is a triple whammy for America in terms of getting value, especially at a time when America's having a profitability crisis. That's its main goal out of anything. So even if Venezuelans are celebrating, objectively, the situation is still the same. America's goal is not to give Venezuelans democracy, and they will not receive democracy. And I am 100% confident in saying that.
Oh, definitely, 100 billion%. You just said the 80 people died. Did you see? I just saw 38 Cubans died. Did you see?
No, I didn't
They were
see
like,
that.
Yeah, I heard conflicting reports about that.
me too, but I saw the
Maduro's bodyguards were Cuban.
yes, but I saw I think it was the Cuban Foreign Ministry. I could be wrong. I just saw the Instagram like 10 minutes ago. Like 38 Cubans died. I don't know. It's weird. Well, we don't know yet, right? We don't know what went down, but we're gonna talk about that later.
Also, what I've been paying attention to is apparently a lot of Chinese emissaries were in Venezuela when this happened. So I've been waiting for China's reaction to this. I think they might just keep it hush hush, honestly, in regards to the emissaries, right? I don't know. Because
Well, I don't think I'm not sure if the Chinese were in Caracas, right? I think they were in the coastal region, but not near Caracas. I'm not sure, but well, we don't know that. But yes, it's a funny thought that they were just like Chinese people walking around the crossfire, like Chinese officials. Wait, you go back home.
And overall, this operation is so poorly thought out, right? News reporting is coming out that the reason Trump really did it was what convinced him in the end was because Maduro was dancing to "No War, Peace," like his little remix song. Yeah, the man can't say his W's for the life of him. "No War, Peace.
No war. Yeah, he's a little, I don't know. There are a few like he's like Trump for me. I don't know. I really don't like Maduro. I have a lot of criticisms of him, but he's a very charming guy.
He's very funny,
He- He's very funny. He's very charming.
Yeah.
He's a bit like when Trump isn't like the worst person, like the most ridiculous person you've ever heard. Like he can be very charming. I guess that's the problem, right? But yes, Maduro is a very very funny guy.
Yeah, and the way he's able to work crowds is just amazing. Um, but essentially, America has no exit plan right now. Like what happens next? You try Maduro. For whatever reason, they thought decapitation this time would work in terms of collapsing the Venezuelan government. That's not how governments work, though. So they're going to turn Maduro into a martyr. His supporters are now going to support him more than ever in the current government. Um, they may try to do like some sort of aerial bombardment, like like they did in not Venezuela, Yugoslavia, to do regime change. But eventually, you got to send in ground troops, and this is a very unpopular war. And
Yes, and Yugoslavia was a very like Serbia. That was a very different situation,
yeah,
right? Now you have. It's true. We quote in the article again. Sometimes with Venezuela, especially, statistics are very complicated, and you don't really know what's true, right? Because the Venezuelan statistics say one thing, and the Americans say another thing. With Machado, for example, the Venezuelan statistics say that 92% of the Venezuelans hold unfavorable opinions of her, and the Americans say basically the exact opposite. But with Maduro, at least we know he has like a supporter base of around 35% of the country. 35%. In some it's 30, in some it's 40, which is not a lot. But many of those, you have to understand, these are people, they were loyal Chavistas under Chavez. and they hold on to this maybe Bolivarian idealism, right? This Chavez dream. And many of these people are in militias, they are armed, right? The Bolivarian, this is, although not a majority, this is a very, they have a lot of power in the country and a lot of power against maybe invaders. A lot of power.
Yeah, and of course, Venezuela has armed peasant militias that are decentralized. So you get rid of the Bolivarian government, you create a power vacuum so similar to the rise of ISIS after Iraq fell. Of course, the ideologies are completely different and the context is completely different. But and that will just drag America into a forever war, which citizens at home do not want. When you invaded Iraq, at least you had like around 66% support for bombing the ever living shit out of Iraqis because Americans didn't know the difference between, a Khaliji and an Iraqi and an Afghani. Like they were all just the Muslims that took down the September. I almost called the World Trade Centers the September 11th, but
Samuel building.
the September 11th building. But nowadays you have no support whatsoever. The only support you have is from people who are happy that the dictator is gone. And sure, people can be happy about that, but that doesn't necessarily mean people want an invasion and a long war. So
Well, we have pretty good. We have on this. There are fairly good statistics. I'm just looking through the text. Yes, here. According to a representative study, which again we searched every study there is, every study, and we took one that's like in the middle, right? Because it's really like statistics. Look it up yourself on Venezuela are horrible, really horrible. According to a representative study, 30% here of Venezuelans still identify as Chavistas. Okay, 30%. And only 37% see Maduro as the legitimate president, right? This was 2024. At the same time, 83%, 2025, of Venezuelans are against a US military intervention to overthrow Maduro. So this is, important.
It is such folly, really, to believe that just because somebody dislikes Maduro, that means they want to be bombed. That is such an American folly. That is only what an American could think. The majority of Americans do not like Trump, but that does not mean we want to be bombed by China to change our president.
Well, it's bombed, but it's less. And this is, I'm going to get into this. The Venezuelan. Well, I don't like to talk about a people as having been conditioned in some sense, right? This is a polemic way of me saying this, but the Venezuelan people have at one time been, for the most part, Chavistas, right? In 2004, 2005, and then the golden days like 2010 or whatnot, like the largest part of the Venezuelan people, the Venezuelan workers, were Chavistas. And during this time, you already had the oil strike of the opposition. You had the 2002 coup. You had all these tries of the US and obviously the national capital too. This wasn't just the US, of overthrowing the Chavista government. So even if today these people don't identify with Chavismo, they still definitely don't want anyone kind of meddling in their business, even if they have a Maduro, whom I personally don't like, but
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, just like Venezuela celebrating in Miami means nothing, right? This is absolute media overblowing. So I don't know. It's Trump has gotten himself into such a dangerous pickle where any move next does not play out well for him, even if in the most best case scenario he manages to topple the Bolivarian regime. That is still a commitment of decades for America, and the empire is already overextended as it is, and nor do Americans want this war. So you are actively alienating your home population. Like that is a dangerous sort of predicament. That
and the end of the oh, sorry, Cactus, you first.
I was just going to say, in a way, we already have seen, in a way, this is paradoxically a retreat. Um, and it comes at a time when the US government seems to be increasingly talking about annexing Venezuela, or excuse me, not Venezuela, Greenland, from the Kingdom of Denmark.
Yeah.
And so this is sort of it seems on the surface as though the US has become revanchist and is more expansionist. But at the end of the day, what we're really seeing is a retreat, actually, from places like the Middle East and the Western Pacific, and an aggressive attempt to control North and South America, because the US no longer has the power projection relative to other great powers to completely dominate regions like the Middle East. And we're seeing longtime allies of the United States, like Saudi Arabia, now kind of playing both sides between the US and China. And also, kind of breakdown where the UAE and Saudi Arabia are now kind of fighting each other over Yemen. They're not as aligned behind the US as they once were. And so while this is horrific and it's a disturbing turn of events, I think it also does represent the US focusing on the Western Hemisphere. And in a way, this whole America First movement seems to be arguing that, well, Iraq, is on the other side of the world, Afghanistan, these are faraway places, but this is our backyard. And so it's somehow different. And, it works and a lot of Americans are just loser, insecure, pathetic, guys with big trucks that just, it makes them feel masculine, and they have this chauvinism that, oh, we went and, killed a bunch of people and stuff. So, who knows how it'll play out, but yeah, it definitely seems like the public reaction is more negative than Iraq for all kinds of reasons.
Definitely.
But I just wanted to point.
I was at my uncle's party, and he was very in support of removing Maduro. I was all like, "Why?" And he's all like, "Dude, all my truck drivers, they have lived under his horrible regime, and they also lived in the backyard. Like Venezuela's right in their backyard. He's right next to them." And I was like, "Oh, well, what race are your truck drivers?" And he said, Mexican." And that's I think that's MAGA first. Like that explains like everything. I mean, that and also Trump's new words, the Monroe Doctrine, right? From the Monroe Doctrine, which was always sort of America's justification for its regime change wars, taking Puerto Rico, Guam, Hawaii. America is retreating as China and Russia overwhelmingly are winning. And it's choosing to restructure all these American governments, Cuba and Venezuela, so to extract as much resources as possible, because America is also facing at the same time, and I've been saying this constantly, a profitability crisis. I mean, the falling rate of profit in America is getting insane, and I think that explains these rash actions, and also the Greenland thing. And in fact, this whole invasion, this whole operation, and taking Maduro to American courts and not the ICC or anything like that, represents America tearing up the post-World War II order. I mean, Britain and France and Spain and all these nations that are traditionally American allies have been absolutely shocked by this. And while, like France and Britain have played it safe, Spain's, of course, condemning this. Um, what really I think they're doing behind closed doors is freaking the fuck out. I mean, this is the most rogue that America has been. America is ripping up an international order was set up by America to benefit America, and it shows really that desperation of an empire.
Yeah, it's a new world order, definitely. And I want to maybe just say one thing about the reasoning of why they're doing this to Venezuela, because I'm seeing right, and I find it, I don't know how I feel about people thinking this is just about oil, right? On the one hand, I think, well, it's not true. For me, I don't. Although Trump keeps like uh, saying stuff in that direction, I don't think this is about oil at all. But I think it's fine when people think that, although it's kind of wrong. It's not true, but I think it goes in the right direction, right? It's kind of it's yeah. America is not doing this for the reasons it says it does. Well, why are they doing this? I think it's about AI for one. I think when you talk about resources, it's about coltan, it's about gold, it's about nickel, copper, whatever. If you want to do the resources thing, I don't think it's about oil, because it's 2026. The US is a net exporter of oil between 2008 and today, 2023. The US crude oil production rose from like 5 million barrels per day to 12.9 million, and they're getting their stuff from Canada, and it's very productive. It's a they don't need oil anymore, right? It's different now. I think this is solely about BRICS, and they're worried about, well, it's not solely about BRICS, but I think like keeping the hegemony alive in South Africa. South Africa, sorry, South America. It's late here, by the way. It's almost 1 a.m. Keeping the hegemony alive there. That's the thing. This isn't a resource thing. Just wanted to put
And
that out
I
there.
think it was the same with the Iraq war, like I think the OPEC, like the impact of OPEC really can't be understated, because it's also just about the ability of the US to control the price of oil.
Wow.
It wasn't like Iraq gave the US a bunch of oil, but the US just had control over the price of oil, and could just loot the country, of all this stuff, and make sure that it wasn't even a meager regional power like it was.
Well, this is you're making a great segue to a short history of the Venezuela thing, because
Mhm.
actually OPEC, which I didn't know, which I don't know why did I read this? I think in the Richard Gott book, the Betancourt, the first president of Venezuela after the Jimenez dictatorship got overthrown, he was kind of the founder of OPEC. Did you know this?
But
No.
Venezuela wasn't part of OPEC. or
Yes,
OPEC.
I know, but it wasn't. It wasn't. But well, here I wrote, at the same time, little known to many, Betancourt played a key role in the creation of OPEC, Venezuela as the world's most oil-rich country, or rather Betancourt's then Minister of Mines, Juan Pablo Perez Alfonso, convinced the oil-rich state of Middle East, Kuwait, Saudi, in cooperation with NASA, to sign an initially secret declaration on national control of their oil resources. And then Gott writes in his book, his agreement called for the creation of an oil consultative committee among these countries in order to improve their oil revenues. The seed of OPEC was thus planted. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that is.
I just
Also, oil's been trading recently for like in the mid 50s range. So I mean, flooding the market with more oil would make it not profitable for companies at all. So I think your monopoly point is more so right. They're not more so trying to flood the market with oil. They're trying to keep Venezuela from itself flooding the market with oil, which would hurt oil companies in America and their profitability.
Definitely. But then
Um,
again, when people say this, like when people say, well, they're just going there for oil, I think, okay, you have the right idea, right? It's
Yeah.
like, okay, no, right? But I think I don't want to sound like what do you say? How do you say in English? Condescending.
Condescending.
Condescending. Yes, I don't want to sound yes, that word, condescending.
Yeah.
But I'm like, yeah, I don't want to explain to you like the I don't know, US hegemony in the backyard, right? It's just you get the gist, you know?
Yeah, it's funny. Your English is amazing, by the way, but it's funny what particular words are difficult in second languages. Like I get the
It is. Thank you.
but yeah, I mean, I think that the situation is always nuanced, and as Marxist-Leninists, we have to have a very serious, material analysis, a scientific dialectical analysis. And then of course there's always a trade-off. Like if a bunch of people are saying, oh, they're just doing it for oil, at the end of the day, that's still a win for us.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
It's enough to reject and I completely agree with you there. And sometimes it's such an important skill to know, like, and it's an important skill for a vanguardist political movement to be able to know, this is something where we should explain, like, no, this is, I don't think that's the case or something. And this is another time where we should just say, basically, it's,
Yeah.
we don't need to be annoying about this. Like
And then
the bigger picture.
fully agree. And then kind of where one, I think where one should kind of say, yeah, okay, well, hold on, is definitely Israel, right? Where it's kind of at the beginning, right? There were kind of some points were correctly connected, and people were saying, well, this is Israeli interests. And now, even like not America first people, and even people on the left, I see, they say everything is, I don't know, we're fighting Mossad's wars and stuff. And I think like, no. This is we're going in the wrong direction. Not everything is a Maduro.
The reason I can't get a
The Jews. Yes,
Or at
yes.
least like it's a
We're fighting the Jews' war in Venezuela. No, we're not fighting. No one's fighting anyone's war anywhere. This is nation states and capital and but
also, I will
we'll
say
see.
Israel
I
certainly.
feel like you think of it. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, well, I will say certainly Israel is certainly using this escalation as a pretext to start building up towards Iran, because it's America's essentially showing that it's all holds bar, right? Like you can just go apeshit crazy now, like forget about the international order.
Yeah.
But of course, yeah, no, I mean,
Yes,
Serbs and
but
Americans.
definitely, I fully agree. That's a fair point. You know what I mean, though.
Yeah, I think that's also like I feel like I think of it more as a dead end because you're really letting the US off the hook, without which Israel couldn't do anything. And, America is a country which is much, much worse and more evil than Israel. The American military is a much more evil and terrible and destructive organization than the IDF.
Israel's a vassal state, right? Not the US.
Exactly.
The US is not a vassal state of America. This is the kind of the idealist rotation of this this dependency. Sorry, between the two countries. No, right? And I see this all the time. Like, we're fighting Israel's wars, and no.
Yeah, Israel fights ours.
Yes.
But also, I think at the end of the day, even if they're wrong, like I think it's more of a dead end because it's still better than supporting Israel to, have these anti-Semitic conspiracies or think Israel is controlling the US. I would argue that's still better than a lot of people supporting Israel. But then it's a dead end, right? Because you have to get them to understand the bigger picture and the real underlying problem of American imperialism, and that Israel is basically part of America. And it's really clear when you see in places like New York, for example. I mean, people fly back and forth for business constantly. Like most people in Israel speak English. They have family in the United States.
Yeah.
It's a deeply, deeply connected set of countries. It's
I
really
must say-
more like the 51st state.
Yeah, I must say, well, this is maybe a topic for another day, but I disagree with you there. I don't think, well, I agree with the dead end thing, right? But I don't, I believe it's far worse kind of for building a correct consciousness for people to go down anti-Semitic idealisms than kind of the regular bourgeois liberal that supports Israel as a state, right? I think, but this is a topic for another
I
day.
totally get it. I mean, there's a lot of nuance for sure, but
Yes.
I think that I've gone more and more towards a much more pragmatic, like, attitude where, at the end of the day, and frankly, luckily, Jewish people in the West are not, materially marginalized in such a way, as they were in Germany, for example, in such a way that it is likely that any of these conspiracies or anti-Semitism turns into actual harm outside of, some isolated attacks.
Yeah, like
It's all bad, but
Yeah.
we have to like I guess I've become more utilitarian, but you're also absolutely right because then it can suck back down into like
Yeah.
supporting Israel, even and anti-Semitism can be a path to supporting Israel as well,
Yes.
and just supporting fascist ideology in general. And this sort of idea like, well, as long as so-called Jewish interests get out of America, they can do whatever they want in Israel and will do. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
think that and I think the American far right, people like Nick Fuentes, if they ever really got power, that's probably what they would do. They probably would keep supporting Israel and just make a big show about how, oh, supposedly, Israel isn't here anymore, but they can do what they want.
Yeah.
So you're completely right that it does become not only an issue because of anti-Semitism, but also more materially important for our purposes, like an issue in terms of fighting Israel.
I wrote this article. Oh, sorry, you may.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a metaphysical idealism, the idea that there's this religious group out there that's the reason that America acts the way it acts, and not because of the social being of America, right? Like or the world itself, right? The productive forces and the relations of production, the world around man. And also the right wing, what it keeps on doing is it uses anti-migrant talk and anti-Israel talk and whatever anti-Jew talk. They always sprinkle in a little bit of anti-Semitism, but they sort of do a wink wink dog whistle kind of way.
Well.
Yeah,
Yes.
and they use that to gain power. And then what do they do? All they do is just austerity, deport migrants, and then support Israel, right? They use all of this to essentially turn an organic energy that is genuinely against Israel back into the system itself and reinforcing it and reinforcing Israel. I mean, Israel is part of the Patriots Front in the European Union, or not Israel, Likud, which is the ruling party of Israel, which is just far right-wing anti-migrant parties. I mean, this is just their game plan, right? No matter how anti-Semitic you are a pawn of Israel. And the first people really to help out Israel were the Nazis, right? Like through the Havara Agreement, they helped out the World Zionist Organization set up shop within Palestine. And in return, the World Zionist Organization in their companies in Palestine helped the Germans avoid trade sanctions. So this is just a long history of helping each other out while publicly saying, "I hate Nazis, I hate Jews." It's such a farce, honestly.
Mm, mhm. Definitely. There's a on the Havara agreement, just a little recommendation. I saw a movie a while back. It's called Die Wohnung. I don't know if I guess The Flat. It's a actually Israeli-German movie about, but it's like it's a great movie. Just a little tip there.
Yeah.
The Flat. It's very good. Yes, definitely.
Steering this
and-
conversation a little. Sorry for cutting you off. Let's get a little bit into Venezuelan history.
First, I would like to add a little note regarding Bolivar, because I don't think you know the term Bolivarian Revolution. Maybe you probably know who Simon Bolivar was, but I think many people don't. Are you aware of Simon Bolivar? I'm guessing.
Yes, I'm aware of Simon Bolivar.
Of course.
I had a biography on him, yeah.
Yes. So Bolivar obviously was the independence fighter, led liberation of large parts of Latin America from Spanish colonial rule. Bonapartist ruler of Gran Colombia after, right? And Marx wrote about him. Marx wrote very funnily about him. Saw him in line with Napoleon and Suluk as kind of the two main representatives of Bonapartism, which is interesting because Bolivar was maybe the most Bonapartist of all the Bonapartists, as he was kind of a radical Republican, but then visited France, and I still don't understand how.
I also wanted to say, like, when Hegel was finishing Phenomenology of Spirit, he saw he saw Napoleon walk past his window, like
Yes, I
Napoleon was
know.
everywhere.
Yes, he was everywhere. He was like Ho Chi Minh. Yeah, he was everywhere. So yes, this dictator, Jimenez, Marcos Perez Jimenez, was overthrown in 1953. He was I wouldn't say a pawn of U.S. interests, but he was definitely very close to U.S. interests. And he even got awarded like this Medal of Honor by the I think some U.S. department for like best communist hunter or something. So in 1953, he was overthrown by a united front between the AG, Social Democrats, the Acción Democrática, the Conservatives, Skopai, the Liberals, the URD, but they weren't that important, and the Communist Party. And after this pact was over, kind of these two later ruling parties, right? The Social Democrats, the AD, and the Conservatives, the Skopai, they got together and they made a pact, right? The pact of Punto Fijo, right? And this pact was just saying, yeah, only we two rule, and this was a very fast democracy, and it was specifically built and made to keep the communists out of power, right? Because the communists, after they kind of led the overthrow of Jimenez in a grand general strike that overthrew him in 1953. The communists spearheaded this general strike. And then after, the ruling parties were very much fearful of a communist insurgency across the whole country, because in 53, when Jimenez was overthrown, it kind of looked like that in Caracas, right, in the capital. And the communists were far larger than both ruling parties. They had more power. So the ruling parties, the AD and the COPAI, made this pact, the Pact of Punto Fijo, which would be known as Punto Figismo, this era of them both ruling. And this era was plagued by massive, ridiculous corruption. But one must say it varied very much from ruler to ruler and from how good the oil was doing, right? So in the beginning, you had, what was his name? Bentancur. He was a regular conservative, didn't really do anything too special, but with the Communist Party having been banned, you had a resurgence of guerrilla groups all across the peasant land, and the material conditions were 70% of agricultural land were owned by 2% of the population. Almost 500,000 peasants were totally landless, right? And Bentancur started importing U.S. military advisors to train against these growing communist guerrillas in the mountains. And then Bentancur, the next guy that followed was the little Batista, as I think Richard Gott calls him, Raul Leone, and he was a real Batista clone, right? He built concentration camps. And I don't know, you have to say, like, these guerrilla groups, they were horrible. They were adventurous, really not that planned. There was the FALN, that was kind of the DACH organization that took more organizational route later, but really nothing came from them. But the Cubans sent over a couple, I think no one really knows, but money and weapons to train these guerrilla groups, but nothing came from them, and many people were put in really concentration camps, murdered, executed by the state, by the conservatives, Leone, and this small guerrilla insurgency got crushed. And then after, good for the state that the oil prices grew massively, and you had the Venezuela Saudita under Perez, which was the oil prices tripled in 3 years after the I don't want to get it wrong. The Yom Kippur War. And the OPEC said, well, okay, every country that supports Israel will throttle how much oil we produce by 5%, which sounds minuscule, but is apparently was very much a lot. And of course, the US and the Western states came to help Israel in the Yom Kippur War, and thus OPEC throttled their oil, and oil prices boomed, and kind of all the Western powers that didn't get their oil from OPEC now just went to core OPEC, right? There was a OPEC, core OPEC, and then like a larger OPEC. And they went to Venezuela, bought their oil there, and Venezuela was swimming in money. This Perez guy, he was like a statist, like very much like a little Argentinian guy with a Peron, who was kind of like a Peron guy. Yes, he was very much a Peron guy, like social democrat. People were living great lives, right? There was so much money, and they were so corrupt. But there was so much money that
That it didn't matter.
despite all the corruption, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, they were swimming in money. Like, Caracas became the most modern city in Latin America for a while. Like, it was ridiculous, right? There's a anecdote, Dame dos, right? There's an anecdote. Who makes this anecdote? Carol makes it in Comandante Hugo Chavez Venezuela's great book. There's this Dame dos anecdote. I'll just read here. Imported luxury goods, expensive cars, and travel abroad became symbols of this new oil class, right? This middle class that was rapidly growing. The expression Dame dos, give me two, with which the owning and manager classes of Venezuela shopped abroad, is often used to characterize. So this, they went to Miami and whatever, and it didn't matter. Dame dos, give me two. I don't care. Expensive car, dame dos, right? You have this super rich middle class, obviously, oil managing class. But for the peasants, this meant that the agriculture just wasn't profitable anymore. So the state stopped subsidizing, right? Is that correct? Subsidizing?
Yeah,
Yes.
subsidizing.
Yes, they stopped subsidizing.
I actually have to drop out at the end of the hour, but it was great to meet you, and thank you so much.
Bro, great to meet you, boss. Hopefully we see you again. So for the workers, this meant they were pushed to the sides of Caracas. They had to flee to the city. They had to flee the land because there was no one cared to buy their products because there was so much money coming in. It was far more profitable to just import everything, right? And the national agricultural products, they couldn't compete with the cheap imports, so they all lost their jobs, and roughly 100 to 300,000, it's difficult to say, fled to the cities, to Caracas, to the barrios on the side of the city, right? And these became very important later for Chavez uprising. Then after this Venezuela Saudita and the Dutch disease, right? Are you aware of the term Dutch disease?
Yeah, it's when you're only relying on one commodity sort of as your main economic thing, right?
Yes, definitely. Yes, right. Because the rest, cause it's just too profitable, right? The rest isn't profitable enough.
Mm.
So
I meant to ask, why do you think Venezuela has had such a hard time sort of diversifying its economy?
because they don't care, right? Because oil was such a huge deal, and this was also Chavez's mistake. Chavez held this Bolivarian bourgeoisie, the Boliburguesa, which they would call it, held this Bolivarian bourgeoisie, the oil class, super close. So it just wasn't profitable, right? It stood against the capital interests of the only important sector in the country. So, you had under the rule up to Chavez, and then under Chavez, right, it became a bit more complicated. You had incredibly connected financial and political capital. So that's the reason. So everything was great, right? And this is what I think Richard Gott also refers to as like Venezuela Saudita, right? The Saudi Venezuela, super like crazy amounts of money, nothing mattered, just swam in oil money, petrodollars, didn't care. Then after I was just kind of, it's all like reading it now, it almost seems a bit ridiculous because it seems like very naive, right? I don't know. It seems so naive. But of course, the capital cost doesn't care about naivety, but still. So they imported everything. Imports grew 33% a year in the 70s. And then after the oil prices dropped just a little bit, it was done, right? They had a huge amount of debt. All of a sudden, the bolivar dropped in worth substantially. The bolivar had to be, what do you call it in English? It had to be, yes, yeah, no, not inflation, but it had to be made worth more.
Oh, okay. I don't know the word for that. I'm not an economist. Sorry.
Well, it had to be made worth more. So that's the
Okay.
Black Friday, the Viernes Negro on February 18th, 1983. The Venezuelan banking system remained closed. Government of Luis Herrera Campins, who followed Perez, was confronted with an almost empty foreign exchange stock of the central bank. Right, there was nothing left, and he declared the state's insolvency and devalued the bolivar by 100%. And now there was a uprising because the peasants that flew to the cities were crammed in ridiculously horrible tiny carport houses on the side of in the poor barrios, and this is the Caracazo later followed, right? And you had this decade of austerity. They had to go to the IMF to get money, right? Because all his oil prices weren't going up. And the IMF told them, what the IMF does, the Washington Doctrine. Well, save money here. And they did. And life expectancy dropped massively. The population living in poverty rose to over 44% in the coming decade. Inflation climbed up to 85% by the end of the decade. Real wages fell rapidly. And then in these barrios, and this is important for Chavez, kind of a counterculture, like very much like indigenous, anarchist in parts counterculture, where people had to rely on themselves, their neighborhoods, and they couldn't rely on the state because all the social programs were cut, right, through the IMF. And in these barrios, where these 4 barrios, by the end of the coming decade, 80% of Venezuelans resided. 80%, right?
Right. And this sets us up for the Bolivarian Revolution, which I think in your article you sort of expertly show had many democratic elements to it, and yet Chavez sort of just took it into the state and really sort of incorporated it into a sort of new kind of capitalist regime. So if you want to pick up from anything I'm sort of laying down and extend from there.
Yes. Well, when Chavez took power, right, he tried his coup in 1992 after the Caracazo, and he became famous overnight, and then got elected in 1999. After he took power, um, this was a grassroots movement, really, like a grassroots movement, and he said, okay, let's get a new constitution going, and 71% of the voted for another referendum to vote this constitution in, and it was decided by thousands, like Cuba style. I don't know if you're aware of how the last Cuban constitution got elected in, but like these neighborhood committees all over the country, really after the Cuban model. Actually, Chavez modeled them after the Cuban neighborhood committees, like grassroots. And then Chavez just didn't care, right? This new constitution got put into place, okay? It was not socialist, but it was radically, I wrote in the article, was radically anti-imperialist, social democrat, right? It's kind of very contradictory in parts. It wasn't socialist, but it was a Lassallean kind of third way, very Lassallean in how it presented itself, but it's social democratic in its nature. And then Chavez just didn't care for the institutions he created, or at least in the 49 laws, famous 49 laws, which he would later, in the following, I think in 3 years later, which expropriated some of the landowners, but not enough. He did this besides the institutions, the neighborhood committees that were created, and pretty much ruled by decree from then on. Yes, sure.
Absolutely, because the revolution it saw
Well, revolution is a tough word.
right
I would. This was like this was a reform process.
reform.
That yes, it would, and we write this in the text also. That's why we kind of restrained from using the Bolivarian Revolution. It really wasn't, right? It was a very, very, very progressive social democracy. That's good.
And it did get communes, right? You know, Venezuela currently has 19,500 councils. But also it balanced that with the, like you said, bourgeoisie, right? Like then
Yes, it's a tough word to say.
it really is. And this sort of created a clash between this very genuine democratic uprising from the bottom up and a state which was still maintaining bourgeois rule. And so
Mhm. But here we have to kind of, for the first time, look at the external factors, right? Because this, I'm just going to refer to it as Bolivarian bourgeoisie because I think I butchered it earlier, and you did too. So we both did. The Bolivarian bourgeoisie, which were in essence just which weren't the old capitalists, right? The old capitalists were now on the opposition, right? They were with big media, which would 2002 with the coup against Chavez become a big problem for him. But these were the new capitalists, right? Because Chavez, when he wanted, so I talked about these 49 laws, right? And he wanted to put in place these 49 laws, which were not revolutionary, but they were pretty progressive, right? We expropriated some land and whatnot, and the capital class wasn't happy. And the capital class then got with the opposition, and they tried to dethrone Chavez, the Chavistas, right? In the 2002 coup, which failed due to a mass movement. Although one has to add, the Chavistas did shoot at protesters gathering there. Although this is a complicated topic, I would suggest reading our article and the part on kind of what happened there. It's very complicated. No, to this day, no one knows who shot the people. Some people were just dead, and it's not really true who killed them. So Chavez had to, or he thought he had to, after the oil strike that followed in the following year, where the opposition sabotaged the economy after they couldn't dethrone Chavez, he tried to huddle up to the bourgeoisie, and that's when this deep bond between the Chavistas and the Bolivarian bourgeoisie formed, right? And this would, as you said, later, as kind of the economical base didn't change, right? They just tried to put a progressive superstructure on a hardly progressive base where it failed. And you have to say, okay, external pressure, right? The US did play a massive role in the oil strike and the coup, right? And the people involved in the coup were visiting the White House before and stuff. Chavez did kind of a Stalin argument, but to defend the Bolivarian process, cuddle up to the capital class, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's sort of the primary contradiction that the left doesn't really address that much. I mean, they will be willing to talk about sanctions and meddling and US things like that. But the current situation within Venezuela is as much, and of course, every single process on earth, and this is very hard for sometimes leftists to understand, is due to internal contradictions as much as external. And so moving on to that transition from Chavez to Maduro, when do we get to that? How do we get to that 2014 situation?
Mm. So Dutch disease, like I said earlier, but with Maduro, it's actually a bit more complicated and very hard to put like in under 5 hours, probably. Because I mean, the crisis, the 2014 crisis, 2019 crisis, this is like a very economic and very boring. To put it kind of less boring, oil was very low. Oil prices were super low. The Chavistas cuddled up to this Bolivarian bourgeoisie a lot, right? During the 5 years prior. This meant that these Bolivarian capitalists, as in the capitalists that were close to Chavez, that were loyal to him, got huge government grants and were subsidized and whatnot. But this also meant that the kind of the commodities they were producing, the factories that they had, were incredibly poorly managed, because Chavez, being paranoid, and the Chavistas being fairly paranoid at a certain point. And by the way, I don't want to sound too anti-Chavez. He did amazing. The Misiones helped millions out of poverty, and we just kind of skipped now all the wonderful things the Chavistas did. Right? They really, this was a huge thing what they did. Right? But we have
Millions
to be
of people
critical.
participated within this process, and there was expansion of democracy, like the aforementioned council.
Massive.
Yeah.
To just make that clear, Chavez was in his heart, and I'm sure he was a true revolutionary. I mean, I do believe it. I don't believe it with Maduro. I don't believe it. But you know, it doesn't change anything about kind of the conditions he had before him and the mistakes the Chavistas did make as a social democratic platform. But yes, so at a horrible point in 2014, and then Obama and the US before and after imposed massive sanctions on them, which cut off. And this is kind of an argument too, what I was saying earlier, right? This isn't about oil because the US cut itself off from Venezuelan oil in 2014, I think it was. Oh no, I think it was in 2017 they cut itself off because the US was Venezuela's biggest trading partner, right? They were the #1 importer of Venezuelan oil, and they cut Venezuela off, which meant that the Chavistas had I think, well, in a couple of years, a 41% fall in their GDP. And then hyperinflation came because when this was really close to Chavez's death, right? And then when Chavez died and Maduro took over, he received a country not in shambles, but very close to the edge, right? It was still holding on to the petrodollars. It was still going okay, but everyone knew, and there's a great Times article, funny enough, I'm not the biggest fan of the Times, but there's a almost eerie prediction made in the Times by some bourgeois economist, but he was right about what's going to happen to Venezuela, and he was exactly right. And the Chavistas were confronted with massive amount of debts, no petrodollars, because again, the Dutch disease, they didn't invest in anything. It was all oil. And they funded these massive progressive social programs, but had incredible corruption on their hands. And this Bolivarian bourgeoisie, they funneled billions out of the country, billions.
So setting up the situation, oil prices are down, America's cut off trade, and that was their big trading partner.
Yes.
And then Chavez dies, right? So, and of course, Chavez dies, and you've got this very corrupt class of bourgeoisie that have essentially turned it into a single commodity economy. And so this is the situation that Maduro inherits.
Yes, here, yes, true. Just regarding this, between 2003 and 2013, an estimated 150 billion was removed from Venezuela, achieved by purchasing foreign assets with US dollars that were initially spent domestically. This is a bit boring economic stuff, but as the Chavez loyal capitalist Bolivarian bourgeoisie was often exempt from standard dollar limits, right? You had dollar limits for the non-Bolivarian capital, right? The regular capitalists and petit bourgeoisie and whatnot, but the Chavez loyal capital was exempt. They didn't have dollar limits. So you had a situation where, it sounds ridiculous. Imagine, right? Imagine you're a capitalist, a Bolivarian capitalist. You're super close to Chavez, maybe opportunistically, maybe not, okay? You buy subsidized imports and sell them outside of the country. In, I don't know, Colombia or whatever.
At that point, you're just using the proletariat's money to
Yes.
That's insane.
And this was, and Chavez saw this, right? And we write in the article, Chavez wasn't dumb. The Chavistas weren't dumb. They were scared. And maybe rightly so, right? Because you had this very powerful capital class that really still was as powerful as before. They were just kind of laying on top of all this government subsidized money. You know, they were fine. They were making their profits. They didn't care. But as soon, and Chavez maybe was right here because he saw it in 2002 and 2003 with the coup and the oil strike. What happens when the profits stop coming in, right? And then they looked the other way with all this massive corruption because, I mean, we're talking 150 billion, right? This is, you notice these amounts of money. Yeah, so yeah.
Yeah, and what would you say? Was it more like Chavez had control over the bourgeoisie, or was it the other way around?
No, that's a very, very, very good question. A mix of both. But I would argue that in crisis, it was definitely the Bolivarian bourgeoisie had a lot of power over Chavez. And I think that's why he looked away, why he looked the other way. Right? Factories were mismanaged. The oil production was incredibly unproductive. Right? The productive forces were. I actually wrote this part. It is hardly conceivable that Chavez knew nothing of this massive corruption. As naive as it may seem in retrospect, it served the purpose of securing Bolivarian rule. The anger of the capital had almost brought about the end of Chavismo in 2002 and 2003. And precisely this corruption, over-evaluation, and capital fight could today again mean the possible end of Chavismo, right? It was kind of these, and then I wrote, this is maybe making it very short, this economic horror. The fiscal strategy of Chavez government was always unchangeably, consciously expansive. Instead of building up large oil reserves for bad times, almost all funds flowed directly into the social programs, subsidies, and state investments. The dramatic consequence of the Dutch disease of the lost decades are where the IMF impose the austerity. That's what the Venezuelan calls the lost decades, okay? Of the lost decades were simply not learned from. Cooperation with the oil Bolivarian bourgeoisie prevented the petrodollars from flowing into the construction of less profitable sectors, right? What we talked about. The consequence was a massive dependence on global oil prices and a growing willingness to indebt state companies to meet short-term fiscal requirements and political goals, right? The share of oil export in total export value rose to 96% in 2014, the highest value in Venezuelan history. Yeah, 96%.
Yeah. It just seems like there wasn't any good future proofing or planning. It was all short term,
Zero.
like quarter one.
Zero. This was also to meet political goals, right? Because the Chavistas were incredibly, had approval ratings of 73, 74%, 86% at one point, right? And this approval wasn't built on a genuine proletarian upheaval or whatnot. It was based upon a radical petrodollar social democracy. We get billions of petrodollars, funnel as much of them as possible back into the people, which is nice and all, but it's social democracy, right?
Yeah. There's still commodity production. There's still
Yes.
basic aspects of a capitalist economy. It's just very reorganized.
Contradictions. Yes.
It's just reorganized to benefit the people more, just for, to some extent, it almost seems like just to keep yourself in power, right? Or the bourgeoisie in power, right? Give the people enough concessions through these councils and etc. And in some ways, when I'm looking at Venezuela, especially like the 19,500 councils, it seems like a halfway step between what is needed, right? This like radical socialism that abolishes, law of value and commodity production and is international and everything, everything we wish for, of course, a halfway step between that and also trying to mediate class conflict. And so it almost gets close to the truth, but it doesn't quite. And that's its sort of a big failing point. And that's, leads to the corruption and self-eating of funds and our current situation. So Maduro comes into power and then he sort of implements in a neoliberal turn. What's that like?
Yes. Yeah, well, now kind of there's the Chavismo view of the Chavistas and kind of the people defending Maduro, and then there's kind of, I guess, our view, and it will be yours too. Although I guess the Chavismo view is fair, if you, it's hard to put in English, wenn die Herrschaft der Selbstzweck ist, if you just want to be, if the rule of the Chavistas is kind of the end goal, right? But it isn't, right? The people's prosperity or whatnot is the end goal. But if you see kind of the rule of the Chavistas as the end goal, then Maduro did everything right? He had a basically bankrupt country in front of his hand. He had growing labor unions that were starting to not be pro-Chavez. He had the communists, right? The Communist Party that was starting to speak out about against Maduro and kind of all the mistakes the state is doing. And Maduro just said, yeah, okay, we're going to stay here. We're going to stay in power. So let's do neoliberal reforms. Let's privatize businesses. He privatized large parts, not the most part, but big parts of state industries. And all the power that these grassroots movement really had, right? 23 de Enero and these really progressive barrios and in them these communal structures, as you said, these were for the most part stripped from their power and centralized. And then of course Chavez founded the Chavista Party, I'm forgetting the name. Wait, I just get the Partido Socialista Unido de Venezuela, which was a Bonapartist party, right? This wasn't a socialist party or anything. Right. And Maduro, the party centralized basically all power, not all power, but frankly a lot, and much more than under Chavez. Yeah, and I mean, the best example is the Communist Party, right? I don't know. Do you know of the Communist Party of Venezuela? What happened there?
I am not aware of their fate. I know they were against
Yes.
Maduro.
Yes. Well, yeah, it's quite the Communist Party of Venezuela, right? The PCV, which is a very old party, and they were part of the guerrillas under Leone and whatnot, was still pro Chavismo just a few years ago, right? Like I think till like 2019, they were even pro Maduro, but critical, but we're still like, yeah, okay, let's go with Maduro, right? Had a new government loyal leadership installed after criticism of Maduro's state restructuring, right? They said, well, let's not do neoliberalism. This isn't the answer. And this decision was kind of ratified by the Supreme Court, triggered thousands of people in Caracas who demonstrated their support for the original party leadership. And now there's two. There's the kind of the real Communist Party, and then there's the other Communist Party and the one is just kind of the party where the Supreme Court said, okay, well, let's switch out the leadership for someone more Maduro friendly. So that's the fate, yeah.
That's is the real one against Maduro still?
Yes.
Okay.
The real ones against Maduro.
Yeah.
They're pretty cool on Instagram. They do great videos.
Yeah, I've seen a couple tweets by them. They were spreading hot fire. So he's neoliberalized things. He's introduced these sort of special economic zones, to invest foreign capital.
But again, not in a China sense, right? I don't know how you stand to China, but it's we can agree that kind of the Chinese or the Deng Xiaoping policies and whatnot were long-term stuff, and what Maduro is doing is not long-term stuff. This is to keep him in power, to keep the capital happy, and the material conditions have worsened drastically. Now I see, for example, the Instagram page Fight for a Future.
Yes.
They posted like the Venezuelan GDP has grown massively over the last 2 years. This is not relevant. This would have maybe been relevant under Chavez, right? Under the when the Constitution of 2000 was still really actually in place, but it's not relevant anymore, right? The GDP has no relevance anymore for the lives of the people in Venezuela. It's a social democracy in deep crisis.
Right. It's just as useless as a number as GDP is in America for our.
Definitely. Maybe a little less. You guys are crazy, but yes, definitely.
That makes sense. So when does Maduro get sanctions placed on him? And how does that affect it? Besides the neoliberalization?
Well, for the first time, it's Maduro in 2015. Maduro, I'm saying Obama in 2015, right? He declared Venezuela, and I quote, an unusual and extraordinary threat to national security and foreign policy of the United States. He did it via an executive order, and now the accumulated loans of the central bank to state enterprises in the same year reached a volume of about 74% of the central bank's entire assets by the end of 2017. Right, this is incredible. This is ridiculous. And Maduro, despite the sanctions, however, continued to resort to central bank funds to compensate for the missing petrodollars, right? Because petrodollars were missing, and Maduro just told the bank, okay, we're missing dollars, print more, print more. I don't want to make capital unhappy. And with the executive order, the oil embargo followed then a couple years later, and then the production of oil fell to a low of 337,000 barrels per day, which is ridiculous, like the lowest it's ever been. And then the sanctions-related income losses led to severe shortages of food and medicine, and by the United Nations, a very, very good paper that estimates that through these sanctions, about 40,000 Venezuelans died in 2017 and 2018 alone due to lack of access to the imports of life-saving treatments for HIV, cancer, diabetes. Because under Obama said, okay, you guys can't import stuff anymore, right, from the US. But Obama, under Obama, because this was the nice kind of imperialism, right, where you still kind of winked an eye, you would still import medicine and hygiene products. This was later undone, not officially, but no medicine medicine that had to be imported reached Venezuela, and people died. Yeah, 40,000 people died.
It's the typical story of America strangling a nation, of course.
Yes. Yes, and Trump called it the maximum strangulation. In
Yeah.
2017, his tactic was called the maximum strangulation. Yeah.
And of course, it's made worse by the Chavismo's all own policies of corruption and things such as that. So that makes sense.
I would actually say when Trump announced his maximum strangulation, then it reached a 50-50, right? It's 50-50 internal contradictions, internal corruption, deep ties, the deepest ties between financial and political capital, and then external maximum strangulation, right? Like Venezuela in 2019 was in a horrible place, but then, to be fair, they reached out to BRICS, to China, to Russia, and actually got some of the oil sold there. A lot of oil then went to China, and that helped them a little bit, but
Mm. Didn't restore the damage done so far.
No, it hasn't been restored. GDP is growing again because they can sell to Russia and China and whatnot. But again, these wonderful, in essence, not in reality, but in essence, revolutionary things that the Chavistas did have, for the most part, been undone.
And this brings us back to the Monroe Doctrine and the recent strikes on drug boats, the
Yes.
sort of fake made-up narco-terrorist line, which honestly, I have to hand it to Trump. That is a great sort of brain turn-offer, because in America, the word terrorist turns off people's brains. The words drugs turns off people's brains to all critical thinking. So like combining them both and also connecting it somehow to Hezbollah, I think really was
Yeah, Labubu Hezbollah.
yeah. That was genius. Um, and then this operation finally seals the deal. Overall, Venezuela seems to be a very weakened society after decades of not only internal issues, corruption, but also external sanction regimes and policies isolating it from the world economy. Um, so your a lot of your article, what is essentially arguing is that Venezuela might not make it. Is that the right way to read it, or
No, that's not the right way.
okay,
Venezuela will make it.
okay.
I'm arguing that. We are arguing that Maduro has, or the when I say Maduro, I'm not a Hegelian, right? I am not saying like big men make big history. I'm saying like the Chavistas, the ruling party under Maduro, has made many mistakes, and I don't think a Marxist or even a leftist in the broader term should be in any, it's like, yeah, I don't care, right? It's a reactionary party. It's become reactionary. It's quite interesting. There's a lot to learn on how it became reactionary and how that all went down, right? But in essence, today it's a reactionary party. But the absolute mass of Venezuelans do not want invasion. It's also true that the hardliners, and it's like I said, statistics for Venezuela are very hard to say, right? For example, Venezuela says they have 8 million soldiers in reserve. I doubt it, right? I doubt it. But I think 3 million is a better number. But you definitely have the Bolivarian militias and really these people's militias that are still kind of left over from the Chavez days, which back in the day you pointed out were really autonomous, right? Now are more or less state militias, right? But still, you have a lot of people that are armed. You have a lot of room for reform. I don't think Venezuela, in its current state, will make it. Yes, but with or without the U.S. aggression, I think either Maduro or some other person has to make big changes for the Chavismo movement to continue and gain strength again, because I do think there is a lot of strength to be gained again. I mean, even you have to imagine, even in this deep of crisis, I mean, you had a hyperinflation of a massive hyperinflation, some of the biggest the world has ever seen. Even after these horrible crises, you still have 35% of people in support of Maduro, right?
Mhm.
It's
And
like there's
of
yeah.
course, it will be a very costly war for America to do any kind of regime change or anything like that. Again, we've been mentioning it multiple times. It's going to be a decades long commitment. And people generally do not like, no matter how much they hate Maduro, they generally do not like being controlled by another power. I mean, that is just
Yes.
a fact of empire.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, and I mean, the U.S. tried at least 9 times between 2017 and 2020. So in 3 years, they tried at least 9 times uh, to, with mutinies at like mid-level officer levels, to get rid of Maduro, to get rid of the Chavistas. It didn't work, and that's why, funny enough, we made a very, very wrong statement in our article. And at the end, we wrote, a further central question for U.S. strategists is that of the loyalty of the regular army. Maduro has established his rule as coup-proof since since the first Dutch crisis. This has been proven wrong. We do believe, I talked to the others, we do believe that someone, probably a mid-range, mid-level officer, gave information to the Americans, right? It couldn't have gone that smooth either without. Because it couldn't have been someone higher up, because this is the corruption I was talking about, right? This is how Maduro coup-proofed the people around him. They are rich, like they are ridiculously rich. They have so much oil money, like yeah. So it has to be someone at like mid-level, but that's probably how they did it.
Right, right. I would say a good communist line in all of this would be, of course, the Bolivarian regime is itself exploitative in many ways, but revolutionary defeatism to some extent, support no war, stand in solidarity with the Venezuelan people, the proletariat, because this imperialist aggression is, of course, evil. It's not going to benefit anybody, and also support the Venezuelan people themselves getting a better system than the one that they currently have.
Yeah, and in Venezuela again, there's hope, right? There's you have a I hate to say a people is something, right? A people is nothing, but there's again, saying polemically, you have a revolutionary people. You have a lot of people that have revolutionary ideas, and you have a long history of consciousness, of class consciousness. So I fully agree with you.
Yeah. And not only that, this has sort of revitalized so many revolutionary aspects of Venezuelan society that have been dead for a long time. So we'll see where it goes from here. Thankfully, I'm leaving us on a hopeful note rather than a shitty note. Um, final question. Do you think Chavez was Lenin and Maduro Stalin, or is Maduro more like Saddam? That was a dumb question.
No, that's the best question ever. Chavez is Hafiz al-Assad and
Uh-huh.
Maduro is Bashar. That's good.
That's the best. That's the best
Yeah.
comparison you could have made. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, that's good. Well, I guess he's a little Stalin. No, he's not Stalin. No. He wishes. He's not Stalin.
No, not even close. Not even close.
No. He's Bashar. He's very Bashar coded.
All right, Mateus. This has been fun. Thank you so much for coming on. I know it's very late over there. It's 1:45, right?
Yes, 1:45. I hope I didn't ramble way too much, but it's very late and I'm very tired.
No problem. I enjoy the rambling. Tell people where they can find your magazine and promote anything else you want to.
Well, read the Venezuela piece. It's called Venezuela Burnt Dragon. It was horrible and very fun to write. It has like 142 citations. It's a very academically, like scientifically written piece. You can find us at kritikpunkt.com, which is KRITIKPUNKT.com, and the same thing on Instagram. You'll find us.
Okay. And everything will be linked in the description of this episode. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Pokepreet podcast. If you want to support our podcast, you can always head down to our Patreon, where you can get episodes up to a month early. Workers of the world unite. Long live the immortal science of Marxist-Leninism. Thank you.
Be happy. La 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 la. Just peace, not war.